My name is Ernesto Garcia, and this is Let's Talk Las Cruces, a division of Mesilla Valley News, where we get to go to the insights of some of the issues that are affecting us here in the Mesilla Valley and even across our state. And with the state legislature that is continuing to happen, we will be diving into that. Now, for those of you listening on the air, this is a podcast that you can also download from the station's website on Mesilla Valley News Audio on Demand. Now, for those of you watching on the metaverse, which means Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, as well. Eventually, it'll figure out TikTok too. We'll get that in. You'll be able to respond on comments on this February 10th at around 1:30 p.m. We're getting a chance to speak with Raul Torrez. We'll bring him on in just a second. But first of all, this segment and this show is once again sponsored by our friends over at American Document Services, ADSLCNM.com. And you can go to 300 North 17th Street in Las Cruces, American Document Services. You can also give them a call at 575-647-0060. American Document Services for all of your scanning, storing, and shredding needs. Save time, save money, preserve natural resources. Yes, document scanning, document storage, medical record scanning, storage, and of course that one thing that I'm sure the DA would love to finally get rid of is paper. And he gets a laugh on that one, so I'll let him come and explain that in just a second. It's all at American Document Services, ADSLC nm.com. We're getting a chance to get to know our neighbors up in the north a little bit better, and that would be Mr. Raul Torrez. He is the district attorney for Bernalillo County, and I'm going to get right into it. Today's headlines, and people are very much concerned still, especially in your county, and we're trying to really focus it here in our county, crime in the area. And the governor made it clear that she wanted to see some reform on crime, on some public safety issues, but it seems that with a week left to go, that nothing might change. And your thoughts about that right away, Mr. Torres?
Well, Ernesto, I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to visit with you and visit with your listeners. I'll just say that I'm proud that the governor has taken a lead in advocating for some important public safety proposals. It enjoys the backing of the mayor here in Albuquerque, and I know that the crime situation in Albuquerque is not the same, across the state. We fortunately do have some communities that aren't suffering through the same levels of violent crime and gun violence that we see here in the metro area. But my sense is that there is a real sense for urgent change, at least among my constituents here in the central part of the state. And there are some common sense reforms and fixes that we can implement that will enable us, I believe, to take violent, dangerous, and often armed criminals off the streets of the city, and in doing so, protect, New Mexico's families. I know that in a 30-day session, there are lots of other issues that would impact crime and public safety. And I am the first one to say that we should take a comprehensive view, that we should look at lots of other investments in prevention and substance abuse treatment and mental health treatment. And it's particularly in ways we can deal with juvenile offenders or young people who've had a really traumatic history and have been exposed to real harm early in childhood. And if they don't get the right services, they will end up more likely to end up in the criminal justice system. But despite the fact that we have to do those other things, it doesn't mean that we should shy away from what I think are common sense approaches to taking some of the more dangerous people off the streets. And I think, from the feedback that I'm getting from across the state, most people recognize the need for change. They understand that the criminal justice system just isn't functioning the way that they expect it to. And my hope is that we can get some traction in the last week and really start making progress on some of these bills.
Well, Mr. Torres, I got to ask you as well. I mean, as we come into this issue, this is one that now, let's just put it this way. In the state legislature, we have had a bill passed that will allow for teachers to get raises that had unanimous part. We have payday loans that are being cut down on unanimous part. It's probably the most time that I've ever seen Republicans and Democrats come together. But when it comes to this issue, there is a big divide between the very progressive part of the Democratic Party and the very much moderates, knowing that a lot of people fear that we could be a California situation where we have smash and grab suddenly become allowed.
No, I think we, as Democrats, we have to demonstrate that we're able to engage in reform that is absolutely necessary given the historical legacy of frankly injustice inside our criminal justice system. But we have to be smart, and we have to take a balanced approach. And my perspective is that a call to look more carefully and be more judicious when we have people charged with murder, people charged with sexual assault, people charged with human trafficking, or armed felons. I think that's in line with common sense. I think that's in line with where the community thinks we need to be. And one of the things that's kind of unfortunate about this conversation is that we advance a proposal to take those categories of criminals that I just identified, the most serious, the most violent defendants, and talk about applying a stricter framework for judges when they're making that decision. And then we apply that to all of the criminal justice system. And, frankly, those of us who are on the leading edge of reform, we have to be able to do this in a way that we can show people we keep communities safe. And unfortunately, in other parts of the country, the reform has gotten out of balance. It's gotten to places where we don't have enough resources in place. And more than anything else, and you're seeing some of this in New Mexico, I'm a second generation prosecutor. I've been doing this for a very long time. My family's been engaged in law enforcement for a very long time. And one of the unfortunate things that I've noticed is some of the same people that, you just talked about education, or, we talk about healthcare. When healthcare professionals go to Santa Fe, they're listened to. When education professionals go to Santa Fe, they're listened to. In fact, most policymakers are unwilling to make big decisions without really trying to understand the challenges of the people that are on the front lines. But we've gotten to a place now where frontline public safety professionals and law enforcement professionals are kind of disregarded, and our experience and our concerns are pushed aside. And we've seen that, frankly, for the last 10 years. And I think it's brought us to this place. And there are those of us who are committed to reform, but also have an obligation to ensure public safety. And we need to start listening to people on the front lines. We need to start listening, frankly, more to victims. One of the most shameful aspects of what's been going up on in Santa Fe, and I don't know if you've been following it, we've had a number of people who are opponents to some of these public safety packages. And then when victims of crime try to register, their perspective or their opinions, they're just shut down, and they don't get equal respect, and they don't get an equal seat at the table. And I just don't think that's right. So I agree with the governor that if the legislature adjourns without addressing crime and public safety, it will be a very serious missed opportunity to show the people of New Mexico that we can engage in meaningful reform and keep people safe.
I'll tell you what, that is what people are very much concerned about, but it's not only going to affect the part of the state. We are going to talk about resources a little bit and what it means to put it this way. I'm going to guess right now you're very much understaffed, probably still. You're dealing with more cases than you've probably seen in a while. And even in your county, this is what a lot of other counties are fearing, especially here in Doniana, where we're seeing a crime intake as well increase. Less officers, not as many people and lawyers coming out as well. And in a sense, we've got backlogs in courts. The system has its problems, but you have to deal with it. And what are some of the measures that you are doing to try to help to make sure that things are well in your county right now?
Right. So we're in a very unique situation. My office is the largest prosecution office in the state by a lot, bigger than the U.S. Attorney's Office, bigger than the Attorney General's office. We've had over 100,000 criminal referrals in the 5 years since I've been the district attorney. And so we are operating at a scale and a pace that is frankly hard for other systems to comprehend. But we also have very unique structural challenges. Most people are unaware that about 7 or 8 years ago, the Supreme Court imposed expedited procedural timelines for police officers and prosecutors. There are 33 counties in this state, and only one, mine, is the jurisdiction that's expected to comply with all of those expedited timelines. And to your point, the judiciary made those rule changes, and not a single dollar went into any of the component pieces of the criminal justice system. And the net result was the mass dismissal of thousands of felony cases because we knew we couldn't meet the deadlines. It had the benefit of lowering a jail population here that was over the constitutional limits. And I recognize the need to lower those, that population, but we didn't do it in a smart way. We didn't do it in a sustained way. It was just a rule that was imposed on us, and we still operate under those guidelines. So that's one of the first big differences with my jurisdiction and every other part of the state. The other thing is mine is a big urban jurisdiction, and most urban prosecutors in this country rely on access to the grand jury to facilitate the efficient sort of use of police and prosecutors to just launch criminal cases, just to get them on the books so that we can move forward with trial. I went to the legislature years ago and asked and said, we're woefully under-resourced. We have to have more money. Finally, the legislature said, well, yeah, looks like this is a pretty serious challenge. We came back to Albuquerque with those new resources, and the very next week, the district court told us that they were going to slash our access to the grand jury by 70%, which, to put that in perspective, I now use 3 times as many people to initiate 1/3 as many cases as they did in this jurisdiction 10 years ago. And again, simply by changing the rules of the system without any additional resources, we have placed police and prosecutors in this tremendous bind, and we're making it harder for frontline professionals to do the job that the community needs us to do. And then you add on top of that this bail reform, which I voted for, and I frankly continue to support bail reform across the country, because I don't believe that indigent or low risk people who don't have the resources to post a low bond should be held in jail for extended periods of times the way they used to. That said, when we all voted for this, 87% of New Mexicans voted in favor of bail reform. There was a promise made that the most serious and violent offenders would be kept behind bars. And right now I lose more than half of the cases that we have of felonies that involve a firearm. And that is just, mind-boggling to me, to live in a community which has record levels of gun violence, and yet we are just letting people that are armed with guns back out into the streets. It doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to engage in reckless reform. We have to do it in a thoughtful way. And my hope is that the people in positions of power, frankly, Senator Cervantes, who has indicated that he's not even willing to hear a bill on this issue, I would really urge him to take a closer look at what we're dealing with. He's in a very powerful position right now, and the people of Albuquerque and the people of the state are suffering, and we need help and we need action from him, and we're just not seeing it.
And you're mentioning in our congressman that's here, our state representative that's here, that is one of the top officials in the roundhouse right now. If you could have a moment with him, what are you thinking that he needs to see the most? What would you say Mr. Cervantes needs to look at?
Well, Senator Cervantes is a thoughtful guy. I've had conversations with him. He's used this session to highlight a number of structural problems. And I don't deny that there are a number of structural problems, resource issues, and all of those other things. But, if I could give him some advice, we should have been doing that in September and October and November, so that by the time we show up to actually do things in Santa Fe in January, we do things. We don't spend our time doing these open-ended hearings that are, like book reports with no action. And so my fundamental message to him is to get moving and come down and listen. I unfortunately, he and most other pivotal policymakers, they've never set foot in the district, inside the district attorney's office. They've never sat with frontline prosecutors and police officers who are evaluating felony cases at 6 o'clock in the morning when we're trying to make a decision about, should we move to detain somebody? Should we not? What kind of criminal history do they have? What kind of, how are they going to be scored by the risk assessment tool that the district court is using? And there's just a fundamental lack of engagement, a fundamental lack of concern that is really troubling. This is not tax policy. With all due respect to people who are concerned about regulations and taxes, if we get this wrong, people can get hurt and people can die. And it's pretty disappointing that we haven't had this level of attention, for the last month or several months or even years. And we've been asking for it, but we don't seem to be able to get their attention.
Well, it leads me to get to the attention of what you're asking, and I'm sure that the state senators will listen to you and the House of Representatives will listen to you as well and try to get this to be put in. But you're also now, as we mentioned here, as I'm going to point out, you're running also for our district attorney, for our New Mexico Attorney General's office here. So,
Yes,
and this is coming
that's
up on an election very soon part here, and it makes me think, okay, want to have this discussion, but you might be in a different place in the next couple of months if elections come along. So hopefully you're able to do that. But let's talk about the decision to run for the New Mexico Attorney General.
No, absolutely. And in terms of just my background, so that people know, as I mentioned before, I'm a second generation prosecutor. I went away for school, racked up as much student debt as I could possibly put on myself, and then came home on a loan forgiveness program for public interest and went to the front lines handling child abuse cases. I was then hired by Patsy Madrid and Gary King. I was a White House fellow in the Obama administration. I worked for Eric Holder and the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, and came back and was a frontline prosecutor. And so, all of which is to say, I'm a career prosecutor, I'm a career attorney, and a career public servant. I'm not a career politician. I'm somebody that has spent my life in the trenches of public safety. But I think beyond just reforming the criminal justice system and providing public safety, there are very big issues that we need to be prepared for in the months and years ahead. There have been unprecedented attacks on democracy. There have been unprecedented attacks on groups in this country that have been historically discriminated against, an unwinding of the Voting Rights Act, attacks on the ability of people to make sure we have clean air and clean water, and consumers that have just been taken advantage of left and right. And all of those things need to be aggressively attacked at the Attorney General's office. And my perspective on it is I've worked for three different attorney general, two in the state and one at the federal level. I understand the importance of policy. I know how to reinforce policy with impact litigation. And fundamentally, the Attorney General's office has to be a place where we can expect positive change for New Mexico's families. That's why I'm in this race. My family is here. My parents are here. I'm raising two children in this community. And I can't think of a more important thing for me to commit myself to than using my skills and my experience to try and build a better future for them.
Well, it seems like you've been digging in the trenches, fighting in the trenches in Bernalillo County. And so I'm sure the biggest question you get is why make this transition? Why do it here when you're still in one fight over here? But do you see a bigger picture with the possibility if you get this position?
Well, absolutely. I mean, look, my roots in New Mexico run deep, and they're in every corner. My wife is from northern New Mexico. My family's from southern New Mexico, from Lincoln and Chaves County, and so we have to take a broad view of all of the different challenges that we have. And we just need a lot more engagement from the Attorney General's office, not only on crime and public safety, but some of these bigger issues. And unfortunately, we've been a little bit on the sidelines, frankly, with a lot of the national things that have been going on, and relying on California and New York and other jurisdictions to hold the line. One of the things that I did last year is we filed the first ever lawsuit against an organized militia group anywhere in the country. And I took that step, which is unusual for a prosecutor because it's a civil action, but I felt it was necessary to do that because we had violent extremists who felt that they had the right to show up on the streets of this community, heavily armed and organized and ready to confront fellow citizens. And that is a very dark and dangerous road for us to go down. And someone in this state needs to be prepared to stand up and push back against that. And, one of the things that happened in the course of that litigation is that we went and asked Facebook to turn over account information about how this extremist group had recruited other radicals and other people in the social media space, and how they directed some of the action in that, using that platform, and Facebook flatly said they wouldn't turn it over. So then we turned around and filed an action in California to enforce a subpoena from my office against Facebook. And that's the sort of thing that we need to see at the state level. We need to see across the board that kind of engagement, that kind of precise legal initiative that sort of mirrors the big policy picture that we have across all of these different issues. And my sense is, as proud as I am of the work we're doing in the DA's office, and as committed as I am to this community, we can do more and we can do better across the state. And that's why I'm in this race.
Well, one of the big issues that I know that, and I know it gets glorified on TV and you just hear it as more of a saying, but there has been a lot of movement from from the current Attorney General's office to try to stop the drug manufacturers and put them responsible for the opioid crisis that we are dealing with and
Mhm.
across the nation. But that does not, that also includes New Mexico, just in a different form because of our different ethnicity parts as well. What do
Mhm.
you see that you will be able to do if you're elected in fixing that?
Well, the Attorney General's office has an important role to play in terms of forming task force and working with our partners at the U.S. Attorney's Office. One of the great things about having the kind of experience that I have is I have relationships with every major law enforcement agency and leader in this state, and so I worked for years inside the U.S. Attorney's Office. I'm familiar with the DEA, the FBI, and all the federal law enforcement partners that would be needed to tackle that. But to draw your attention to even something maybe even more profound, but receives a lot less attention. We have an epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women in this country and in this state, and a lot of what needs to be done to tackle that problem doesn't get done because of the siloed information that and the breakdown in communication between different jurisdictions, tribal law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and state law enforcement. And we need somebody in the Attorney General's office that's committed to breaking down those barriers and providing real-time information, because it is an absolute outrage that missing and murdered Indigenous women in this country don't receive the type of attention, the type of concern, and most of the community is simply unaware of the impact of human trafficking and what goes on in those communities. And that's exactly the type of thing that an attorney general who understands how the system works, has the right type of experience, and is focused and ready to take up the fight. That's where they can make a difference. And that's the kind of thing that I'm prepared to do from day one.
Well, Mr. Torres, I want to bring up something that maybe, I don't know when if you get attorney general part or not, but here's something that has been developing in a lot of communities and a lot of areas, even here in Las Cruces, has been this development of a system that allows people to report crimes, bring up issues. My neighbor's dog never stays quiet, and they're using an online platform because of the pandemic. It's obviously stepped up. Even look at the way that we're talking right
Mm.
now to be able to do this. Usually, we would just be a phone before, but now with all this technology part, do you think it's time that the courts reform to some type of electronic part and be able to help to put the load down? If judges were able to do this type of format more, a little bit more, would you be in favor of something like that?
Yeah. So one of the things that's been interesting for me, I actually worked in technology before I worked and got my law degree, and part of that experience really taught me the value of data and using information and digital platforms to really expedite how we share information between institutions. When I came into the district attorney's office, we worked with multiple police agencies that had multiple systems that were all built by different vendors, none of which communicated and none of which could talk to one another. And so what we did is we actually built a program in conjunction with the private sector and some friends at Sandia National Labs. They actually come in on the weekends and volunteer their time building applications that help us share information in real time, both so that we can identify missing links in criminal investigations, but we can also spot inefficiencies in the system itself. And the government across the board, not just the criminal justice system, needs a massive upgrade in its information infrastructure and architecture. And we don't have the kind of policy making in Santa Fe that's really looking out over the horizon at what most citizens have come to expect in terms of what they deal with in not only their private lives, but with dealing with private corporations. The world is moving faster, and government is not moving fast enough to adopt and implement new technology, and that's definitely something I think we need to do.
I did get one question here, and I want to get this before. I know we're almost out of time, so I want to make it kind of a brief one here, but it is dealing with border issues. If you're elected, what are you planning to do in prosecution of people that are coming in illegally into this country?
So, well, I can tell you as a former federal prosecutor that border enforcement is a federal responsibility. I worked as an assistant U.S. attorney, and we were responsible for I had human trafficking cases, we had illegal entry cases and things like that. But that's primarily the responsibility of the federal government. I think what we are trying to understand is the way in which those same smuggling routes also become a pipeline, either for narcotics, for guns, or for human smuggling. And so my primary focus is on understanding where those networks are once they cross into this country and how they facilitate other types of criminal conduct that does fall within the jurisdiction of state prosecutors.
Righty, thank you for answering that question. I'm going to leave you with the final word. Obviously, people want to know more about you, and obviously, we're going to hear a lot about you. And I have a feeling you'll be making some trips down to southern New Mexico as you go into this journey to run for an office of the New Mexico Attorney General. What message do you want to give to anybody that's listening, watching, or going to see this video down the road? And what would you tell them that you can expect if you move on from the DA in Bernalillo County to the Attorney General here in New Mexico?
Well, the fundamental question is what kind of leadership we're looking for, not only at the local level but at the state level. What I bring is a lifetime of experience and commitment, and frankly, I think people can tell a willingness to fight and stand up and push back when I think our families are put at risk, and when there are things that are happening across this country that are contrary to our core values. I think we need to stand up and protect our democracy for future generations. We have to do more to protect land and water. We have to do more to make sure that our families are safe and secure. And those are the things that we need to fight for. And I have had the opportunity to come down to Doña Ana and other parts of southern New Mexico. I'll be back down. I'll be in Chaves County this weekend and Lee County this weekend. And I will be making lots of trips down south and would love the opportunity to hear from people and interact with people when I'm down there. But I hope that this message resonates with them, and that if they have an interest in what we're trying to do, that they visit the website at raultorrez.com.
All righty, we put it up there several times. Hopefully people can check it out. Once again, this segment's brought to you by our friends over at American Document Services. They're at adslcnm.com. Next time you're in Las Cruces, please stop on by. We would certainly like to get together and chat a little bit more. I asked you to stay on after we end this broadcast here. Thanks for watching Let's Talk Las Cruces, a division of Mesilla Valley News, for those of you that watched it on social media, and thanks for those of you who are listening on this station.